Devil May Cry 4 is a game that I have a love-hate relationship with, for reasons which you will find out over the coming hour. It's a sequel to one of my all-time favorite games, Devil May Cry 3. A flawed game, but one that has aged really well despite its design issues. It also saved the franchise and helped it become what it is today, and many people, including myself, love the game to death. So when a sequel to the game was announced, anticipation was bigger than any previous game in the series. Devil May Cry 4 also had a much bigger audience than previous titles, as it was the first DMC game to be released on an Xbox console. Whilst Devil May Cry was a PlayStation exclusive, it wasn't owned by Sony, and thus Capcom could make it more available for more platforms. They did this for a few reasons, mainly because of larger sales. The developers were aware that this game would be the starting point of the series for many players, especially those coming from Xbox. So they made the smart idea to have an entirely new protagonist for the game, Nero. Characters such as Dante, Lady, and Trish were still a part of the game, but it helps attach you to the game much more if this is your introduction to the series, since you're starting out with a new character. Devil May Cry 4 became the best-selling game in the series, selling over 3 million copies. The game was highly praised for its amazing combat system, but was criticized for a lack of content, reused content, and annoying enemy design. There are rumors that Devil May Cry 4 was originally supposed to be in development for 3 years, but the development time was cut down to 2 years, and there were apparently some budget cuts too. Now, we don't know if these rumors are entirely true or not, but they do seem very likely, as it would explain a lot of the interesting choices made with the game we got. The game did also get a re-release in 2015 as Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition, which included 3 new characters to play through the campaign with. It also included some other modes which the PC version had. It also did make a few small changes to the gameplay to make the combat play a little bit better. Anyway, there is a lot to cover with Devil May Cry 4. There are a lot of genuinely great aspects of this game, but there are also some things that puzzle me as to why they were added. So without further ado, here's my retrospective of Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition. Since Nero is the new kid on the block, I'll start with him. Unlike Dante, Nero doesn't have different devil arms and firearms. He has one devil arm, Red Queen, which is a modified sword that allows it to be revved up like a motorcycle to heat up the blade and do fire attacks on enemies. Not only does this provide some insight into Nero's engineering intelligence, but it's also a fun weapon to use. Red Queen has multiple different attacks it can perform on the ground and a couple in the air. And unlike Dante, Nero doesn't have a style system and doesn't need to switch styles to access his entire moveset. For example, in Devil May Cry 3, you need Swordmaster to do attacks in the air. Nero can just do it by default. My favorite is Caliber, which basically allows you to stinger whilst in the air. It's a lot of fun to use because it gives you more mobility when off the ground. Another thing is that Nero's attacks are slower than Dante's but do more damage. Nero doesn't use swordsmanship skills like Dante or Vergil do. He mostly just swings his sword as fast and as hard as possible. Every attack from Red Queen feels like it packs 10 punches behind it. Now on its own, Red Queen would be a pretty okay weapon, but what makes it more fun is the Exceed mechanic. Nero can rev up his sword to make it faster, do more damage, and do slightly different attacks depending on the situation. You can rev up the sword whenever you want, but it takes time and slows you down. However, if you time the rev correctly after each attack, then you will instantly get Exceed. The timing will determine how much you get. If you get the timing exactly correct, then you will get all 3 levels, which is called Max Act. If it's slightly off though, then you only get 1. If you get good with the timing of attacks, then you can pretty much make every attack of yours give Exceed in some capacity. It's a simple quick time mechanic, but it makes the sword more interesting, as using it effectively is a matter of choosing which attack is the most useful during any situation, and getting good with timing. Red Queen is a really fun weapon to use. It has a good variety of moves. The mobility it gives to Nero allows him to jump from enemy to enemy and chain attacks together very easily, plus the Exceed mechanic adds a skill of timing. Nero only has one gun as well, Blue Rose. It's a double-barreled revolver. You can rapid fire it to stun lock enemies, but it's more useful when you use charge shots. You can tell the charge level by Nero's hand glowing. Charge shots can blow enemies back and do a lot of damage. There isn't too much to this weapon, but it can be used to chain together attacks very well. However, as firearms go, it's not a very unique weapon and doesn't really do much different from other firearms in the Devil May Cry series. But then we get to Nero's best mechanic, the Devil Bringer. The Devil Bringer is a permanently DT'd arm for Nero. When locked on, it will grab enemies and bring them towards you. In previous games, when an enemy was knocked away, you had to get back over to them to continue combos, unless you had Trickster equipped. With Nero, you can always bring the enemy towards you as long as they're in range, which makes it easier to continue combos. When not locked on, it will do a buster animation of Nero beating the shit out of them. Each enemy has a unique animation and these attacks do a lot of damage. The downside is that you can be hit whilst performing them and thus you have no way to defend yourself, so bustering enemies repeatedly isn't a great tactic. However, it is really satisfying and useful when you do. Plus, you can bust bosses, and it's a really fun way for the game to have contextual fight sequences or QTEs in the boss without making them obvious. You're never told, press X to bust a Vergil, you just see him stunned and then buster him and then bam, cool animation. It's a QuickTime event so well implemented that it doesn't even feel like one, and a lot of people playing the game may not even know it exists. Nero does also have Devil Trigger like other characters, however his is a little different. Instead of getting a devil form, he gets a projection of his Devil Trigger behind him from using Yamato. His DT gives his Blue Rose shots summon swords. At first this may seem useless, but with charge shots, it sends multiple at once and can seriously damage and stun enemies. It also doubles the damage of his attacks, and DT activation does damage and a slight stun. He also gains 2 new moves with Showdown, which makes him go crazy with Yamato, or Maximum Bet, which makes him send 2 cuts that carry and damage enemies. You can also fire summon swords whilst performing these attacks. Nero is a really well designed character, mainly because of how simplistic he is. That's not to say nothing interesting or cool can't be done with him, but compared to Dante in DMC3 or Dante in this game, he's more limited. His mechanics are fun to play around with, but the issue is a lack of variety with him. The 3 mechanics he has are all great and work really well with the game, but I can't help but feel as if a 4th mechanic would have made him much better. Dante in DMC3 only has 3 main mechanics, melee attacks, gun attacks, and a style button. However, the style button has 4 variations that you can play around with, and Dante gets multiple weapons to try out over the course of the game. Nero only has 3 mechanics and none of them change or evolve over the course of the game, which makes Nero's gameplay get a little stale after a while because you've experienced everything with the character. Now yes, you do get upgrades for Nero, but they just give more attacks, and while each attack can add something new to play around with, it doesn't change or evolve the gameplay in a big way like a new weapon or style does. By the end of the 2nd level of the game, you have all 3 mechanics for Nero, and they stay the same for the rest of the game. The only thing left to obtain is his Devil Trigger, which you get at mission 6 out of 20. So just over a quarter into the game, and we now have all of Nero's mechanics unlocked. So after mission 6, Nero doesn't have any new mechanics or really anything to look forward to. Do I think Nero should have more weapons like Dante? I think he could work as a character like that, but I don't think it's needed for him. The point of Nero's character is that he has a few simplistic abilities that can be chained together in fun ways. Adding new weapons for him would give him more depth, but I don't know if it's necessary for his type of character. That's why I said a 4th, entirely new mechanic would be a better option. Have a 4th mechanic that keeps getting entirely new abilities that make combining combos even more unique, which is what the next game did. I don't think Nero's character needed to be changed at all in this game, I just think he needed more to play around with. There is depth to him with things such as inertia, which I will talk about later, but from a design standpoint, he is severely lacking. This also wouldn't be as big of an issue if you didn't play as him for 2/3 of the game. You play as Nero for 13 levels and Dante for 7. You could keep Nero as he is now, but just increase Dante's ratio of missions. Maybe go 50-50 for both of them. Because the fact is that for most of the game you play as Nero and nothing new goes on with him or his gameplay. Dante has far more to his gameplay than Nero does, so it's annoying when you spend most of the game playing as a character with far less mechanical depth. So yeah, Nero is a great character, but the lack of gameplay evolution and variety from him makes him fall a little short, even if he is a lot of fun to play as. In Devil May Cry 4's Special Edition, Lady and Trish were added, which is the first and so far only time that Lady was playable. Trish was in DMC2 though. Anyway, the way Lady plays is interesting. Imagine Dante's gunslinger style and having an entire character designed around it. Lady has 3 weapons, 2 handguns, a shotgun, and Cleaner Ann. All 3 weapons do different attacks depending on directional inputs. Some of them rapid fire, some of them juggle enemies, and some of them launch enemies or do an area of effect damage. Cleaner Ann is Lady's only melee weapon, which can be used both on the ground and in the air, and instead of a devil trigger, she has a meter that unleashes a grenade attack. The damage depends on how full the meter is. She also has a hook that can launch enemies up and slam them to the ground. Also, all 3 of her weapons have charge-up attacks that make them do powerful blasts. Lady is a unique character to play as and does have more variety than Nero, but the issue is that almost every encounter with her plays out the same way. Her attacks have the same effect on pretty much every enemy apart from a few, and whilst it is fun to chain together attacks with her gun attacks, she just doesn't really work with this type of game. Dante, for example, has Gunslinger, but Gunslinger is an ability to allow for more attacks with his firearms. His entire character isn't based around it. Apart from DMC2, Devil May Cry isn't about spamming gun attacks to beat enemies. Guns are used to stunlock enemies, chain together attacks, or provide a little damage boost. Even a game like Bayonetta, which incorporates gun combat style, the gun attacks are designed for close-range melee combat. Bayonetta's gun attacks can also be comboed or even have a secondary function as a melee attack. Lady's only melee attack is Cleaner Ann, and I think more could have been done. Give her more melee weapons, and make some of her attacks have secondary functions. For example, this attack where she shoots an enemy up into the air, and then fires in every direction. This is an attack that requires the player to be within close range to work. Have more attacks like this. Have some like the lock-on rocket launcher work better at long range, and have some like this which work better at close range. It encourages the player to prioritize distance to enemies, and makes engaging the enemies much more fun. Otherwise, you can mostly just stay at a distance and spam gun attacks until you have triple S rank. Plus, her charge Cleaner Ann attacks do so much damage, it halves the health bar of pretty much every boss with just one attack. I don't think Lady is a conceptually bad character, I just think she needs more melee attacks and more variety of attacks that encourage the player to get closer to enemies. She's fun, but you do end up playing the game the same way after a while, which can get stale. Trish is okay. She uses the Devil Sword Spada and lightning attacks, but she also has a few attacks where she temporarily throws out the weapon, and her attacks change depending on whether or not she has the sword. This can be fun to combo with and find ways to chain together attacks. Unfortunately, she doesn't have much else apart from this gimmick. She only has one firearm, Lucent Umbria, which functions just like Ebony and Ivory. Otherwise, she plays like an alternative version of Dante. She even reuses animations from Dante. I'm not really sure what to say about her. She does have DT-only moves like Pandora, which are just madly overpowered. Nero has DT-only moves, but they require timing for them to work, whereas Trish just allows you to instantly go boom. She is fun, but she's not very unique apart from the move change gimmick, which is fun to play around with, but that's about it. She is seriously lacking in any sort of depth or reason to play her over the other characters. Lady and Nero have much more depth to them, and that's saying something. Vergil is also a special edition character, like always. I don't think we're ever going to get a mainline Devil May Cry game with him being playable, because Capcom needs a reason to make a special edition. DMC3, Vergil is only in the special edition. Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Vergil is only in the Ultimate Edition. In the reboot, Vergil is a DLC. In DMC5, Vergil is a DLC and in the special edition. Anyway, Vergil takes on his DMC3 appearance and has all of his weapons from Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition: Yamato, Force Edge, and Beowulf. Vergil is massively updated in this game to the point to where DMC3 Vergil feels like a completely different character. Vergil has so many more combat moves with every weapon. Yamato now has multiple combos, all of which are really cool and useful. My favourite is the one where he slashes the sword a billion times and then sheathes it. Some of his moves change as well in DT. The basic attack combo will have 2 more powerful slashes when in DT. However, doing multiple judgment cuts in a row with Yamato is now much harder to do for some reason. You have to do some weird animation cancels in order to achieve it, when it was just a normal thing you could do in Devil May Cry 3. It does feel satisfying to pull these off, but why make players go to the extra effort? Why not just have multiple judgment cuts as a base mechanic for Vergil? He has a new move with Force Edge where he combines both Yamato and Force Edge and just goes ballistic. Force Edge plays pretty similar to DMC3, but why is the air stinger so short? With DT it's much longer, but without it, it barely moves Vergil at all, and this limits Vergil's horizontal movement whilst in the air. Beowulf plays mostly the same, though Luna Phase is much faster. So, Vergil's general moveset has been greatly updated, but what about his other mechanics? A new addition is the concentration meter. The player builds up concentration from attacking enemies, but loses it from things such as running whilst attacking enemies, missing attacks, or getting hit. Basically, the game is trying to make you play the same way Vergil would. There are different levels of concentration, and it not only changes the graphical effects of the attacks, but also makes them do more damage, attack faster, and add more attacks into the current one. It also changes the range in which they have effect. It's a cool concept and works fine enough, but it can be annoying to deal with, mainly because of how it alters attacks. Concentration level 3 can completely change the properties of attacks. So for example, attacks can blow enemies back farther than concentration level 1 or 2 does, which can prove difficult for chaining together attacks, since there isn't a reliable way to switch between concentration levels both up and down. So if you do want to chain together 2 moves, but one of them pushes the enemy too far away, then get fucked, I guess. The fastest way to gain concentration is to stand still, and the fastest way to lose it is to get hit, both of which don't really work for chaining moves together. Also, taunting gives you less concentration than just standing still, which is odd. So there isn't much reason to taunt as Vergil other than getting a little bit more DT. There is also the trick move, which they somehow fucked up. In DMC3, you lock onto an enemy, press the star button, and then boom, you teleport to the enemy. In DMC4 Special Edition, they decided to lift the embedded swords mechanic from Vergil in the reboot. Basically, Vergil embeds a sword into an enemy, and that forms a connection between him and the enemy so that he can teleport to him. This mechanic was done due to the lack of lock-on in that game, so it was a compensation. Won't talk too much about that game right now, but the decision to remove lock-on was one of the stupidest decisions, and this mechanic was trying to make up for that. However, Devil May Cry 4 has lock-on, so this mechanic is completely unnecessary. Even worse though is how it affects Vergil's teleports. Whenever you press trick with Vergil, he will teleport into the air, and you can change the direction he moves in a little bit, depending on which direction you press the stick in. However, if you have embedded a sword into an enemy, then Vergil will automatically teleport to him even if you're not locked on. The only way around this is to lock onto another enemy and embed a sword into them, which takes like half a second to do anyway. Half a second may not sound like much, but this is Devil May Cry, where any period of time is important. In DMC3, Vergil would only teleport to an enemy if you locked onto them, otherwise trick worked as a way to evade attacks, which is hard to do in this game when you're always going to be teleporting to enemies. Basically, they should have just kept the teleport mechanic from DMC3. Devil May Cry 4 has lock-on, so you don't need a mechanic that was only added to compensate for a lack of lock-on. Also, Trick Down will teleport you backwards, but it requires DT to work now. Why? This makes it annoying to dodge attacks, and some bosses like Burial pretty much require Trick Down in order to dodge attacks. Otherwise, your only option is to run around and lose concentration. I don't know why they didn't just keep the mechanic the same way it was in Devil May Cry 3, or even just work it to be more like DMC4 Dante's Trickster. Dante can trick once while not in DT, but can trick as much as he wants whilst in DT. Why not make trick down more like that? Outside of DT you can only do it once at a time, but in DT it can be spammed. Funny enough, the most fun way to play Vergil is Super Vergil, because so many moves that are essential to chaining together attacks and dodging enemy attacks are DT only. But the issue also comes that Vergil does so much damage. Even on DMD without Devil Trigger, Vergil kills enemies quickly, and if you're at max concentration, it's a joke. I get that the fun of Vergil is that he's supposed to be overpowered, but making him this overpowered is silly. To improve Vergil, I would make his trick mechanic work the same as Devil May Cry 3, I would make his ear stinger have more range so as to give Vergil more movement whilst in the air, and I would allow him to do multiple judgment cuts in a row. I'm not sure what to do about the concentration meter though. I like it as a concept, but Vergil in this game would play better if it was removed, or at least he would be more consistent. Like, what does Vergil gain from the concentration meter being included? And I can't even argue balance because Vergil in DMC4 is the most overpowered character out of any game in the series. Does all of this make Vergil a bad character though? No, it doesn't. In fact, Vergil is one of the most fun parts of this game, and there are endless amounts of combo videos showing creative stuff you can do with him. It's just that from a design standpoint, he has a lot of issues. Dante plays very similar to his DMC3 version mechanically. Rebellion has all the same combos, except Drive is now lock-on backwards with Swordmaster, where it was holding the attack button in 3. Instead, holding attack now does round trip. Dante also has Ebony and Ivory, which play the same as Devil May Cry 3, and Coyote, which has a new move that allows Dante to shoot backwards. Dante's styles also mostly function the same as Devil May Cry 3. Trickster can't do 3 dashes in a row anymore, but it can dash as much as you want whilst in DT. And lock on backwards with Royal Guard now makes Dante immune to any and all damage for a short period of time, whilst also slowing him down. Dante does have a new style though, as he obtains Yamato, which means 3 of the 5 characters in this game use Yamato. This gives him the Darkslayer style from DMC3. Dante is able to do basic combos with Yamato and use a version of Judgment Cut End. You can actually decide the distance of where Dante cuts. If you lock on forwards, then the cut will go farther, but if you lock on backwards, then it will go closer. In terms of new weapons, Dante doesn't obtain as many weapons as Devil May Cry 3, but they're still cool nonetheless. Gilgamesh is a new punching weapon that hits hard and fast, but does more attacks and damage if it is charged. It's a lot of fun to do the super bullshit moves with it that destroys the enemy's health bar, but they do take time to perform, so you leave yourself open to attack whilst doing so. There is also Lucifer, which is one of the most unique and interesting weapons in any hack and slash game. It shoots out arrows that explode. This can be used to keep enemies in the air, or ping-pong them into oblivion. The player can explode them whenever they want by doing this animation where Dante throws a rose, and this animation also throws enemies up into the air, which can be used in fun ways to move enemies around or do cool combos. The arrows do explode on their own after a period of time, which many players have used to great effect for repositioning enemies and attacks. Lucifer can be used to deal damage, but it also works as a way to manipulate enemies in whatever way you want. Very few weapons in these types of games allow this level of creativity with how you play around with the enemies. Dante does also get a new firearm, Pandora, which is a briefcase that can transform into 666 different weapons. Obviously it can't turn into that many in the game, but it does still have a good number of weapons inside of it. The basic attack is a rocket launcher, and if the player keeps twisting the joystick, then it will change into a more powerful projectile. You can even aim the weapon up or down. However, you do leave yourself open by doing this. When in the air, Pandora becomes a machine gun that fires in bursts and helps with keeping enemies juggled, and Gunslinger can turn it into a rocket firing machine that allows Dante to float in the air. It can also become a Beyblade that attacks enemies and can catch them when falling, and Dante can do the Pulp Fiction trick where he throws the briefcase on the ground and opens it, and a huge light comes out of it that stuns enemies. Pandora is a great addition, and it means that the game doesn't need any more weapons because you already have one weapon that can turn into multiple. So, whilst Dante does play most of the same as DMC3 and doesn't have as many weapons as DMC3, he's still a lot of fun to play around with, and the new weapons are creative as hell to play around with. But the main addition to Dante's gameplay is something that I think was the best decision ever made for the character. That is that Dante can now switch through all of his styles at any given time. DMC3 was going to allow you to do this, but the PS2 couldn't handle it, so the game only allowed one style at a time. DMC4, however, breaks that, and since Dante has 3 firearms and 3 devil arms, he can switch through every weapon in the game on the fly, instead of only having to pick 2 weapons at a time. The idea is that Dante's arsenal is more limited, but his abilities are more open. This adds so much depth to Dante's character, since none of his moves or abilities are ever restricted, and most of his attacks can be chained together really easily. And considering that he has like 80 completely unique attacks in this game, that is a lot to play around with. Small things like trickstering into an enemy in the air and switching to Swordmaster to do some air attacks, and then switching to Gunslinger to rainstorm them is so much fun in this game. However, there are some minor problems. It's nice to be able to switch between every weapon, but it would be nice if I got to choose what order they switch in. Let's say I do an attack with Rebellion, and I want to follow it up with an attack from Lucifer. I have to switch weapons twice, which, while is very quick, can take some getting used to. It would also make it much easier for people who want to do combo videos, since they can have the setups in the weapons in whatever order they want. Also, I do think that playing as Dante the first time around can be a little bit overbearing. In DMC3, Dante can do 3 things at a time, but when you start as him in this game, he has 2 guns, Rebellion, and 4 different styles. And since there are so few Dante levels in this game, they pretty much hand out every weapon and mechanic at the end of each level, so you get at least some chance to play with it. Darkslayer is given to you in Dante's last level, and it isn't really even applicable to that level. Dante's levels are really short, and he only has 7 levels, so you don't really get a chance to experiment with his mechanics that much during the story mode. In Bloody Palace, there is a lot more room to play about, but I think Dante should have had much more levels. You get plenty of opportunity to play around with Nero, but with Dante you just kinda get pushed along whilst being given new toys that you barely have any time to play with. It's an issue more so of the structure than it is the character. Dante plays really well in this game. His arsenal has been reduced, but many mechanics have been expanded upon in simple ways that allow for endless depth. Nero has his fair share of depth, but Dante is the GOAT of complexity in hack and slash games. The only character that rivals his gameplay options and variety is Bayonetta. Dante is a fucking beast in this game. Even if you aren't a high level player that knows the mechanics of this game inside and out, the pure variety of the character is enough to make him fun to play. So the characters are overall very fun to play around with, however there are some flaws which can be annoying from time to time during gameplay. However, there is more to this game than just the combat system, so I'll explore those aspects. The level design is solid for the most part. DMC4 has the most variety of locations in the series, and if we're talking visuals, then each location looks amazing. This game released in 2008, and the anime-esque visual style still looks really good over a decade later. In terms of the levels themselves, Nero's first 11 missions are really good. You move from location to location very quickly, new bosses and enemies appear frequently, and each and every combat encounter is really great. The Frozen Castle levels are my personal favourite. It's fun to explore and it's hard to get lost since every room is easily recognisable. Like DMC3, the game tries to put some new gameplay gimmicks in each level. I don't think any of them are bad in this game, but they really don't add much to the game aside from pacing each combat encounter. Using the Devil Bringer to travel across gaps or ascend is a cool idea, but all you do is just spam grab until you get to where you need to go. And then there's stuff like these blade things which can be used against enemies and need to be punched in different areas to progress through the level. There is some minor platforming and luckily it isn't as annoying as DMC3, but it still doesn't do much aside from get you from point A to point B. There is also the dice game, which has been constantly criticised as one of the worst aspects of this game. Because it is. Basically, you hit the dice and it lands on a number. Your character then moves a certain number on the board and it can either give you a good result or a bad result. Though people figured out that you can actually get the die to land exactly on whatever number you want. Whatever number is on top of the die when you hit it is what it will land on, so you can consistently get whatever results you want with it. This does cut down on the tedium by doing it, since you can get the die to move in the most efficient pattern possible, but it is still tedious to do in the first place. Yes, the minigame goes from being annoying down to mildly irritating once you figure out how it works, but it still isn't a fun gameplay section. Plus, it appears twice in the game, with Mission 19 being a boss rush with the dice game, which ruins the mission for a lot of people. I understand that they want to implement stuff like this to try and keep the game fresh, but they don't need to. As I said, new locations, enemies, and bosses appear constantly in the first 11 missions of the game. In fact, missions 7 to 11 all have unique boss fights. Yes, Nero is a little limited mechanically, as I said, but there are other things being thrown into the mix to keep the game fresh. I know the player does need a little breather from time to time, and having constant combat would make the game tiring, but the pacing of the game is already great and would probably be still just as good, if not better, without these sections. Other than that though, the first 11 missions of the game are all really good. The issue comes in the second half of the game. Mission 12 is when you start to play as Dante, and then the game makes you backtrack the entire game all the way to the beginning. So now you're just playing the game in reverse with a new character. Heck, you even fight the same bosses in reverse. The levels also do try to have unique gimmicks, such as a Resident Evil style countdown, or having multiple portals to lead to different locations and the player has to pick the right one, or have an enemy that will grab you if you stay on the ground too much, but these don't add much to the game either. Dante only gets one unique level in the entire game, and it's the worst boss fight. Dante's levels aren't necessarily bad levels, they're actually very fun, but what isn't fun is the lack of surprise. Yeah, a few new enemies appear, but there isn't any new content in these levels. Backtracking isn't a bad concept in of itself. It can be a lot of fun to return to an area from earlier in the game and have it change in some way, but these levels are mostly just the same as Nero's levels. And this was, and still is, the biggest criticism with Devil May Cry 4, the fact that the second half of the game is just the first half in reverse. I'd say the level design is an overall improvement over Devil May Cry 3, but the reused levels and the lack of new content aside from Dante himself just makes the game feel repetitive. So my overall stance is that the levels are solid, but the gimmicks and reuse of levels makes playing them again dull. In terms of enemy design, DMC3 wasn't very good. How does the sequel fare? Not that much better. The Scarecrow is the basic fodder type. They are mainly punching bags for the player to try and be stylish with, and there are variations such as the Leg Scarecrow, which has different attacks, and the Mega Scarecrow, which has an entirely different moveset that makes him more challenging to fight, but he still has plenty of ways to play around with him. Mechanically they work fine, but I wish the character models of the Arm Blade and the Leg Blade Scarecrows were more unique. The 7 Hells in DMC3 all had unique character models and silhouettes. In DMC4 they do look the same apart from a few different colours, but at a moment's glance they can look the same. Frost from DMC1 returns, and he has a lot of the same moves from DMC1. He can regain health by creating a shield of ice, and he has a good mix of long-range and close-range attacks, and so he's deadly at any distance. But he can still be stunned really easily and has a variety of ways to combo him. Assault from DMC1 is also back, and is much faster and aggressive in this game. Even if you get a good distance away, he can still close that gap really fast. He also has a little bit of defense, and he can even follow you whilst you're in the air. So he's not fucking around. But he can still be countered in a lot of fun ways. The White Knights are awesome. They have shields which help block attacks from the front, and they can fly and charge your position. As Nero, you can also counter their attacks into a buster. The commander will send out commands to the other troops and coordinate how to attack you. He's also much faster, does more damage, and is harder to stun. They're fast, hit hard, and have more defensive options, which makes the challenge of taking them down really cool. Mephisto and Faust are meh. Mephisto's attacks are too easy to avoid or counter, and taking him down really just comes down to how fast you can get rid of his cloak. Faust is much better as the attacks are faster and do more damage, but the same methods that work on Mephisto work on Faust, so it still comes down to just how fast you get rid of the cloak. There really isn't any interesting ways to fight them. They can't really be manipulated around like other enemies can. You just do the intended strategy and then they're dead. Boring enemy. They're also kind of glitchy with Vergil, as Vergil can cause them to glitch far out of bounds. For example, I made it to stage 82 on Bloody Palace with Vergil, and took out all the enemies, but the stage didn't end, and the timer kept counting down. Turns out that one of the Mephistos went so far out of bounds that it took him 13 minutes to fly back into the stage. Gladius is a sword that flies around and does one of 2 attacks. Nothing interesting can be done with it, just keep hitting it until it's dead. Cut Glass are annoying enemies that jump out of the floor. You just attack them and bring them out and hit them until they're dead. It's not much fun when every interaction with the enemy is the same. You just do the same method every time because there's no other way to fight them. Basilic are dogs that shoot fire. You can combo them, but the lack of variety of attacks makes them boring to fight. Chimeras just jump into you constantly and are harder to air combo because they're designed to go further away from you instead of upwards. They can jump into Scarecrows and Assault and take them over, which makes them the most annoying enemy in Devil May Cry, because they have a blade that will swipe around at complete random. There is no way to tell when the blades will attack, they just will. So close range combat is a pain because you have to be constantly getting hit and losing style because there is no way to predict when they will attack. You just have to guess. And then there is Blitz, who teleports around and has a shield that damages you if you attack him. Unless you're playing as Dante can hit the shield and damage Blitz so long as you Royal Guard after each attack. Remove the shield and he would actually work well as an enemy. He teleports, but each attack is well telegraphed and you have enough time after each attack to get some hits in. But because of the shield, most of the fight will be you just trying to get the shield down, and even when you do, there's nothing fun or interesting to do with him. You can just stun him at best during attacks. No interesting combos can be done with him, he's tedious and boring. So out of 15 enemies in this game, Devil May Cry 4 has 7 good enemies, 1 okay enemy, and 7 shit ones. I mean, that is a better ratio than Devil May Cry 3, but it's still not a good one. None of the enemies in 4 are as annoying as the enemies in 3, but they can still be annoying. Basically, DMC4's enemy design is marginally better than 3's. It's 50% good, 50% shit. The boss fights in this game are okay for the most part. The first boss is Dante. Dante uses all of his moves and weapons when you play as him in the fight. In fact, when you beat the game, he will use the weapons you obtained as him in the boss fight the next time you play the game. The first fight with him is a tutorial, but then the second fight doesn't hold back. Dante even switches styles during the fight, and you better stay back when he uses Royal Guard because he can destroy you with it. Only issue with the fight is that it can be too easy as Nero since the Buster move can be abused too much. Otherwise, it's a great boss. I love whenever a protagonist from a previous game becomes a boss fight in the next game. Next boss is Vergil. Vergil is pretty cool. His size makes it really easy to jump cancel off of him, and he has a good variety of moves that the player has to take into account. The only move I don't like is one where he puts fire in the ground and spurs up around you. The only reliable way to avoid it is to run around. Doing anything else will get you attacked. Otherwise, he's an awesome boss. Next is Bale, which switches between a fight with the big frog himself and these two lures. Bale is kinda spongy. Most of his attacks can be easily dodged, and you just spend most of the fight wailing on him whilst he's doing nothing. The lures have quick attacks that can catch you off guard, but otherwise this boss doesn't really provide much challenge. Not bad, not great. Next is the Containment Room. Devil May Cry 4 has a boss fight where you fight a window. Don't know who on the development team thought this was a good idea, but whoever you are, this was not a very good idea at all. All you do is just smack the window. Next is Echidna, who has similar structure to Bale in that it cycles through attacks and that you just wail on them. Not really much else to the fight. It is fun to try and do the whole fight whilst in the air, but the mechanics are just meh for the most part. Kratos is one of the best boss fights of all time, up there with Vergil in Devil May Cry 3. He has several different attacks that will require you to reach him in different ways, and there are multiple ways to counter his attacks. He's fast and does a lot of damage, and he gains new abilities when you play on higher difficulties. One of my favourite things to do is to buster his spears and throw them at him. So satisfying. Agnes is pretty good. He has a good mix of attacks that require the player to move around the environment. He has attacks for both close and long range, and he can steal health from you if you aren't careful. There is also a lot of fun ways to play around with this fight, especially as Dante. Then there is Sanctus, who has a shield that you need to destroy, and then you reach him and beat the fuck out of him. This boss is really easy despite the variety of attacks, but I do give it a 10 out of 10 simply for this buster animation. But then there is also the Savior, which is absolutely terrible. You shoot its crystals until it dies. That's it. It's boring, and nothing fun or interesting can be done with it. You know what this reminds me of? Yeah. What a shit boss fight. Shame considering this is Dante's final level in the game. So, Devil May Cry 4 has 4 good boss fights, 3 okay ones and 2 shit ones. Again, a better ratio than DMC3, but still only a small improvement. However, you fight most of these bosses 3 times in Devil May Cry 4. You fight them once as Nero, then you fight them again as Dante, and then again as Nero during Mission 19. So you get sick of them quickly. Also, the best boss in the game, Credo, only happens once. Of all the boss fights you could repeat, why don't you repeat him? Don't use the argument of him being dead because all the bosses are dead by Mission 19, but you still fight them anyway. In DMC3, you did fight Vergil 3 times, but each fight was different, and he had new abilities each time. The second fight with Sanctus actually does this. Sanctus has the Devil Sword Spada second time around and has new abilities and attacks. The issue isn't the fact that these bosses are reused, it's that they're reused and they don't have anything new to them. Fighting Burial for the third time is the same as fighting him for the first time. I wouldn't mind fighting these bosses several times if there was something unique to them each time. I would rather fight new bosses, but since this was probably done because the game was rushed, then my suggestion would be to add new abilities. Sanctus and Vergil are good examples on how to reuse boss fights, do more of them. So yeah, the boss fights in DMC4 are pretty good for the most part, but can be annoying to fight the same boss 3 times in the same playthrough, so they can get repetitive. In terms of other additional notes, the ranking system is better in this game. The annoying timer and orb collecting are still a part of the system, but the damage category is completely gone, so you can take a lot of damage and still get an S rank. Though one aspect I don't like is that if you die too many times, the game handicaps enemies for you. Dynamic difficulty, Capcom? Really? Yeah, it worked so well the last time you did it. But still, I'll take this any day over DMC3's ranking system. The style meter is also better because it shows your total style points during the level. Proud Souls are a useless currency. We already have red orbs as a currency, why do we need 2 different currencies? The Devil Bringer can help you find secret red orb locations, which is cool. The camera is much better in this game. DMC4 still uses fixed camera angles, but most of the time the game has a free camera that the player can fully control. The only time the game uses fixed camera angles is during narrow combat encounters where it works, or to give certain levels an atmosphere. But yeah, it's a much better camera. The Special Edition has a few small gameplay changes, one of them being that outside of combat, speed activates almost instantly, so getting around is much faster. Some of the animations were also changed a bit to be a little bit more smooth. Though to be honest, the Special Edition does annoy me a lot, because with all the problems Devil May Cry 4 had in 2008, you could use the excuse that the devs didn't have the time to flesh out the game properly. But when the game gets a re-release in 2015 and the only new added content is 3 new characters and 4 new cutscenes, then yeah, it's hard to use that excuse anymore. I don't blame the developers, since it probably isn't their fault. They probably want to flesh out this game just as much as I want it fleshed out, but I don't know why the Special Edition of Devil May Cry 4 wasn't used as an opportunity to finish the game, or even just to fix problems with the game. Why don't you remove some of the annoying enemies or levels, like Blitz for example? The game would be automatically better. Whilst I like the new characters added, I would rather have Dante get his own levels. But no, the Special Edition doesn't do anything to make DMC4 a more complete game. All it does is add new characters to play the incomplete game with. And what's worse is that the Definitive Edition for the reboot, which released around the same time, got more content. Capcom, you add more content for a finished game than an unfinished one. What the fuck? Special Edition could have been an opportunity to give DMC4 the treatment it deserves, but nah. An interesting note about Devil May Cry 4 though, is that it's a game that people played continuously for over a decade, despite only having 2 characters at release. Devil May Cry 4 is most well known for its deep and complex mechanics that is not seen in pretty much any other game in this genre, and it's because of a few things that were probably, and most definitely, not intentional, but are still part of the game regardless. There is small stuff like distortion, which is a simple but cool thing to do. How it works is that if you activate Devil Trigger right as your attack connects with the enemy, then the attack will actually hit twice. Once with the normal attack and once with the DT attack. So you get 2 hits, which can do insane damage. Funny thing is that even though this is a glitch, Capcom does consider this a legitimate strategy. There is reversals, which allows you to change which direction an attack goes in. Which is cool because you can throw the enemy wherever you want in the level. You aren't limited to just doing attacks forwards. This allows for so much more unique combos and setups. But what Devil May Cry 4 is most known for is inertia. Inertia is the weird physics of this game's engine and how movement works, especially in the air. The easiest way to demonstrate is that if you charge shot with Nero whilst in the air, you notice how he drifts backwards? That's inertia. In its simplest form, inertia allows you to attack whilst moving in the air. Every character has some moves involved in this, and sometimes you'll use it by complete accident. At first glance, it may not seem like much, it may just seem like a weird physics bug, because it is. But this small bug is what gave this game 10 years worth of combo videos. Jump cancelling moves that have inertia behind them doesn't immediately stop the momentum. It will continue into the next move. One of the most famous examples is the Rainstorm move, where you cancel Starfall with Gilgamesh and then Rainstorm. Normally you can't move whilst performing Rainstorm in the game, but because of the momentum of Starfall being carried over into the next move, Dante will move whilst performing Rainstorm. There are also some attacks that can halt your momentum entirely if you don't want to carry inertia over. By experimenting further and further with this, you can not only continue attacks whilst moving through the air, but you can also control where you and the enemy are in the air at any given time. And that's what gives this game so much depth. The fact that every playable character and every enemy can be manipulated vertically and horizontally to almost any extent you want them to be. And considering the large variety of moves that you can pull off in the game, and how easy it is to chain together, this means that there are so many possibilities in how you fight enemies, such as this.
Time has come and so have I. All laugh last 'cause you came to die. The damage done, the pain subsides, and I can see the fear clear when I look in your eye.
Hell, there is even guard flying because of inertia that allows you to pretty much fly around enemies as Dante. And whilst Dante has the most depth with this system out of any character, every character has a huge number of ways to combo enemies because of this. Nero and Vergil have their own fair share of moves that carry momentum, and they can be combined into 10,000 other things. It's ridiculous how much depth small mechanics or small bugs like this give the game. I should note that I've never been good enough at this game to do half of the stuff you're seeing right now, but even then, I've had a lot of fun experimenting with the system, even just at its base level. And this is what made the game so appealing to hardcore fans and why they kept playing the game for a decade despite all of its flaws, because there isn't any other game in its genre that has this many ways to manipulate the mechanics. And that's why, despite being an unfinished mess with recycled content and some annoying enemies, Devil May Cry 4 also happens to be one of the best and most important games in its genre. Yes, pretty much all these mechanics weren't in the game intentionally, but they are still a part of the game regardless and still give it the depth it does have. Even a decade later, there still hasn't been a hack and slash game with this much depth to play around with. Bayonetta comes close, and DMC5 has its own fair share of variety, but DMC4 still edges out in that regard. And that's why so many fans of this game overlook its faults. Yes, Devil May Cry 4 is a very flawed game. It has barely any content, it's obviously unfinished, and some of the enemies outright suck, but it's also worth pointing out that a lot of these creative mechanics probably wouldn't exist in the game if the game wasn't unfinished. They're probably in the game because it was rushed and the devs had to overlook some bugs. So who knows if the game would have had this level of creativity if the game wasn't the mess it is. To be honest, I still would have taken a complete game over what we have now, even if we lost to some of the unique mechanics this game offers. I would still take that any day. But it is worth noting that the game does have its own unique strengths and interesting quirks that no other game, even in this series, has. Devil May Cry 3 and 5 are much more complete and polished games, and objectively better games in most cases, but neither offer what this game does. Devil May Cry 4's gameplay is flawed up the asshole, but it has so many awesome elements if you're able to look past them. Which is why I would still say the gameplay is great despite how flawed it is. Right off the bat, Devil May Cry 4's story is kinda disappointing. DMC3 has a great story with awesome characters and themes explored. DMC4's story is serviceable, but it doesn't hold a candle to the previous game. Nero is a cool character. He's someone who is a part of the Order of the Sword, which worships the legend of Sparda. Whilst Nero is a part of the Order, he isn't very devout to their beliefs, and is mostly a lone wolf. He has a girlfriend named Kyrie, who is probably the most boring character in the series. She's just a damsel in distress, that's it.
Kyrie! Kyrie! Run! Kyrie! Kyrie! Kyrie!
Shut your fucking hole! Sorry about that.
But Nero does develop over the course of the game. He's someone who feels inadequate and is unable to achieve his goals. For example, he's unable to save Credo and Kyrie during the game. He always wants more power, but unlike Vergil, he doesn't want it for selfish reasons. Vergil wanted more power to follow in his father's footsteps, and in doing so, harmed everyone he would want to protect. Nero gains more power over the course of the game, but with it he is able to save and protect those he loves. He's also more mature by the end of the game. At the beginning he's brash and impatient, whereas by the end he's more able to connect with his human emotions. Being the son of Vergil, this makes his journey more interesting, as he was able to achieve what his father failed to do. He used the power given to him for good. Both Nero and Vergil have an inferiority complex to some extent, but Vergil never came to a resolution with it. He never accepted that him constantly going down this rabbit hole will lead to the exact opposite of what he wants. So Nero is interesting in some ways. He's not as interesting as Dante in DMC3, but he has enough character development to keep you invested, and his one-liners are very funny.
Fire's bad for the complexion. I burn easily, never tan.
When I came to this world 2,000 years ago, there was no such human as the likes of you.
Wanna make it another 2,000? So this is what you really look like.
Yes, whatever you look, the slaughter's mouth.
Cut me some slack. I'm just not big on toads. I'll finish this quickly. It's gonna scar me for life. Silent type, huh? Well, that's annoying. Much for friendly banter.
Sanctus is the leader of the Order of the Sword. His objective is to open the demonic portals and cause an invasion, so that he can stop the invasion and be claimed a hero just as Sparta was. Credo is a devout follower of the Order, and is also a polite fellow. Character Agnes constantly stutters his words, but Credo is always patient with him. Which is different from Sanctus, who shows that he does not care enough to let Agnes finish what he's saying.
You sent that cocky kid Nero to find Dante?
You question my command.
Yes! What shall befall me? Should he stumble upon my research facility?
Our priority is to capture Dante.
Why, you...
Credo. Yes, Your Holiness.
The sad thing is that Credo genuinely believed in what Sanctus said he wanted for the world, when it was all a lie. Sanctus just wanted to be known as a hero and put innocent lives at risk and sacrificed innocent lives to achieve it. The Angelo Knights were created by studying the demons and developing knights to fight them. You may also notice that the Angelo Knights bear a resemblance to Nilo Angelo. This is because their armor was created using fragmented pieces of Nilo Angelo's armor. Sanctus developed weapons that would help fight a war he created, and it's depressing that Credo died from fighting for a vision that was a lie. Also, fun fact, Credo was voiced by TJ Rotolo, who voiced Frank West in Dead Rising.
You know how to use this?
Kinda. I've covered wars, you know.
Agnes is a researcher who created all the knights. He's characterized mostly by him stuttering all the time. His wish is to become an angel by using demonic power. He plans to study Nero's arm to further his research. He doesn't really do much story-wise, but he's okay, I guess. Lady Gaga was funny. Always love a bit of TNA in my games. In terms of Dante, he's the rival character and mentor in this game. When the game starts off, Nero and Dante fight, and Dante greatly underestimates Nero. He takes down multiple swordsmen at once without breaking a sweat. But Nero is much more powerful than Dante could have predicted, and thus loses the fight. Seeing this, he becomes interested in Nero and tests him again to see if he is worthy to wield Yamato. So he fights Nero again without holding back this time. Nero doesn't beat Dante, but he does manage to disarm him and is able to hold his own in the fight. Fun fact, Nero tries the same method to beating Dante that Vergil did in DMC3, but obviously Dante won't fall for it a second time. Anyway, after having this experience with Nero, he has the confidence to let Nero keep Yamato. Making Dante the mentor and rival was the best decision with his character. Dante's character arc was completed in DMC1, and DMC3 covered his past, but from this point onward you can't really have Dante as the main protagonist for the story. Ever since the events of DMC1, Dante has mostly just been there to help others along their journey as an experienced devil hunter. It's a nice direction for the character. Lady and Trish are in the game, but since both of their character arcs were completed, there isn't much you can do with them, so they're only in a few cutscenes. So the characters in this game are cool, but they aren't nearly as interesting as DMC3 despite having so many more characters, but it's still enjoyable for what it is. All the interactions with the characters are cool, and the cutscenes are a joy to watch. However, there is a big issue with this game, pacing-wise. The first 11 Nero levels are paced really well. The cutscenes flow well and the story progresses quickly. Then you hit Dante's levels and the story halts completely until Dante returns to Fortuna. Dante's cutscenes are a lot of fun to watch, but they don't progress the story in any way. So for a third of the game, nothing happens story-wise. Not to mention that this happens right as the story hits big momentum. If you remove levels 12 to 16, you would lose nothing story-wise. DMC3's story never halted. The third act slowed down a bit, but there was still progression in the story with all the characters. So, whilst DMC4's story is enjoyable, it is a downgrade from Devil May Cry 3. Characters aren't nearly as interesting and pacing is much worse. This is probably due to troubled development and not the original vision of the story, but it's still what we got. Despite the flaws though, the game's story is enjoyable. Every cutscene is fun as hell to watch, especially between Nero and Dante. Both bond over the course of the story, and it's a satisfying growth for their connection. There are a lot of great character moments and funny moments during the cutscenes, and there is still a lot to enjoy here. But as said, it's disappointing when compared to DMC3. Soundtrack-wise, this game is just as great as DMC3. Every boss has their own unique and awesome battle theme. I like Out of Darkness from the prologue. Both Nero and Dante's battle themes are awesome. I especially like that Dante's theme is a remix of Lock and Load from DMC1. Dante has 2 boss themes that remix his battle theme. The themes that play during the intros for Lady Trish and Vergil are great, though I don't know why they didn't use them as battle themes for the characters. And Shall Never Surrender is a song that perfectly fits with this game.
We'll see, we'll fight until eternity. Come with me, we'll stand and fight together. Through our strength, we'll make a better day. Tomorrow we shall never surrender.
Overall, the soundtrack is awesome. It's an aspect of these games that has always been great. In conclusion, Devil May Cry 4 is a deeply flawed game that has both intentional and unintentional exceptional gameplay mechanics. It's a complete mess, and that may be a disappointment for many, considering the complete package that DMC3 was, but it would also be unfair to ignore or dismiss the amazing and unique experience this game offers. Despite a more polished and complete game now existent, there is still a reason to go back to play Devil May Cry 4. Devil May Cry 4 is an incomplete mess, but it's also a brilliant gem in mechanical depth, gameplay variety, and engine manipulation, and very few games can say the same.
What you do from here is your call. Hey, Dante. Will we meet again?